The first thing I want to ask you about, George, is if you're sitting here in the U.S. and you check the stock market every day, it's predictable what you're going to see. You're going to see a big red number, and where it says stocks fall on Europe worries, or you're going to see a surge, stocks surge on Europe hopes. So what is going on in Europe? Why this instability or this sense of sort of a manic ride, up and down ride?
Well, in these talks, of course, we have all kinds of events during the day that can move the stock market in many different directions, but there is something fundamental, obviously, that has the markets, not just the stock market, but all kinds of markets, interbank market and so forth, which are relatively nervous. They're quite nervous, actually, ever since the subprime crisis. Beyond that, Europe is, of course, the epicenter. The Eurozone is the epicenter of the tremors that we feel right now. And the stakes are quite high. Stakes are high for Europe primarily, but also for the United States and the rest of the world, particularly because of the very tight linkages in the financial markets among financial institutions, banks as well as shadow banks. And now we have the sovereigns in Europe. The sovereigns is what particularly large public debt, which appears to be quite unsustainable with very high interest rates. Obviously, the higher the interest rates, the lower the growth rate, the more unsustainable those debt paths are. And if financial institutions mark to market, and they have to do that nilly-willy, even if they are doing it in a lagged fashion, then that's going to have an impact on the financial markets, and it will have repercussions all the way to your favorite stock that you own, and including all kinds of other markets, whether pork bellies in Chicago or wherever it might be.
If you had to, well, you don't have to choose artificially, but I'm just wondering, in characterizing the situation in the Eurozone, is it about liquidity, or is it about confidence? What is at the root of the problem?
It's primarily confidence. It's confidence. It's confidence. There is no real shortage of liquidity, and this has been already ascertained in the U.S. by John Taylor, for example, and others, in the case of the subprime crisis, but in Europe as well. But there, it's a little bit more complicated in the sense that you not only have tremendous stress in the interbank market, but you also have it in the sovereign market, namely in the market for government paper. So the two of them act and react to each other. And of course, the financial markets are spooked. They don't know how to react to both of this sometimes, and they sometimes just have a knee-jerk reaction to it. They were not really prepared for this sort of situation where you have basically a lethal embrace between the banks and the governments in the Eurozone.
The whole concept of the Eurozone and the Euro, is this a flaw in the plan, what we're seeing happening now? Does something specific need to be tweaked or addressed? Or does it speak to some more fundamental problem that may be not fixable?
The problem is definitely fixable. First of all, of course, to answer that question, I should say that there is nothing really wrong in any fundamental way. There is no flaw in the statutes, in either the treaty or the Stability and Growth Pact. The design is good. In fact, you might say it has a Cartesian logic. It has something that Descartes would have been proud about. The problem is with the practices. The practices were contradictory in many ways. First of all, the very fact that Greece was accepted into the Eurozone was in itself a contradiction because, as everybody knows, Greece at the time, in the late 90s, didn't really meet the criteria for entry. Then, of course, Italy also entered with the particular Euro tax, which was abolished the day after it entered the Eurozone. But what was particularly a problem was that there was clearly a no bailout provision in the treaty, which was in fact put to question early on, primarily as the European Central Bank was willing to discount as collateral all the papers, the government papers of the Eurozone, whether be German or Greek paper, the same way as if it were practically AAA rated. So there was this feeling in the markets and on the part of governments, of political leaders, all around, and credit rating agencies, there was nothing to worry about. If for the ECB this paper was equally good, no matter which government issued them, then why should they be worried about? And you can see this in the yields. The yields were pretty much flat for all of these, namely the risk premium was uniformly flat for all these countries, for the sovereigns of all these countries, up until there were some surprises. And then how the governments of especially the creditor countries reacted, it became pretty clear that there was no such halo, there was no real vaccination against disaster.
You mentioned Greece and Italy, two of the hottest spots when we're looking at the problems. What are the likely scenarios in those countries? What do you see happening? Are we headed to default?
I really don't think that there will be default in any one of these. Well, Greece, it's a big question mark. In the case of Italy, I don't see the elements of a default. Certainly, there is no zero probability. I would say there is non-zero. There is a non-zero probability for default to take place in any one of these countries. But what I see is that in both the case of Italy and Greece, after a long period of denial by political leaders, government leaders, denial, and also as a Financial Times reporter indicated in the case of Spain, navel gazing, now you see the opportunity for serious government leaders to take over, to actually end this denial. They are both serious, seasoned technocrats and patriots at the same time, and they believe in Europe, and they are going to do everything that is humanly possible to do it. They are going to do it. Now the question is, of course, to what extent can they galvanize, and of course after this long road, can they galvanize their societies and bring them to conscience to understand that this is an extremely serious situation. And we already see some elements in the case of Ireland and Portugal where they're not called technocratic governments, but they are full of technocrats, and where they clearly indicated, then they signaled that they want to adjust, they want to do things right. And so far, it seems that it's happening in the right direction. Obviously, the critical mass is much greater in the case of Italy.
It's a volatile situation. It's tough to make predictions. But my final question revolves around a prediction on, does the Eurozone hold? Does the shared currency maintain, or is it retained by all of the members? Where are we headed in this? Or will there be some dropping off or some adjusting?
Well, again, the case of Greece deserves a special attention. It could happen that Greece really leaves and has to leave the Eurozone, but we'll see. I mean, the next few months are critical. For the rest, I would say there is no question in my mind that the Eurozone and the euro as a currency will remain. And it will remain particularly because there is a political compact, and that compact can be kept. It has to be, the work has to be done in multiple fronts. One of them is building institutions, or rather strengthening the institutions, moving towards what is viewed as a fiscal union. Another one, of course, is the adjustment itself, the painful adjustment and restructuring in a number of countries that have been hit hard so far. And then, of course, having the firefighters always ready, namely the European Central Bank, to intervene not only in a sterilized fashion as they are doing now, because they're certainly doing what they can do without really throwing away the rule book. They're doing it right. But of course, the moment of truth can happen if, for example, all of a sudden, there is no access. The market access for Italy, for example, freezes. I mean, that would be a huge job for the European Central Bank and whatever other institutions might be budding right now, but the work is in progress, namely like the European Financial Stability Fund or the European Financial Mechanism.
I cheated. I'm going to ask one more question.
Why not?
You mentioned that Greece is the separate case and has to be talked about separately, and it could drop out. What are the implications of that? What if it does?
If it does, that would be a huge headache, but it can be solved. It is a huge headache in the sense that there are a lot of legal constructs that would have to be visited and revisited. For example, legal contracts entered in euro. And obviously some very tough measures have to be taken by the Greeks primarily, namely, for example, freeze bank deposits or add a tax onto the old or new currency that they would have, say a new drachma. And we have, of course, some lessons on that, for example, from the Austrian-Hungarian monarchy as it dismembered. Obviously, again, that dismembered because the political pact was not there, the compact was not there for good reason. It was the end of the war. These countries lost the war, the First World War, and all its parts lost the war. So the monetary union fell apart, and the crown itself, the crown was the euro, the currency at the time in 1919, of course, ended. But it's really that comparison is very, very tenuous. And again, I see a big difference between the crown of the Habsburg monarchy, and I'm talking about the currency, and the euro today.
Okay, great. Thanks, George.
Thank you very much. Was that?
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay.
Right,
It should be.
Your microphone?
Yeah.